All right, welcome back. So I have a few issues with the ICC making this this ban, and the first one would be that having followed a few other sports, and I've been really interested to see where cricket will go with this. But having followed a few other sports, I think probably rugby would be one of the major ones. There's been a lot of research done and a lot of science, and I don't think that the ICC has done any of that. And my worry is always when you lead with, especially for what is in cricket, let's be honest, majority old conservative men making a decision based on women's sport when most of them don't actually care all that much about the women's game anyway to begin with. The funniest thing about, well, it's not funny, it's pretty tragic, but the ironic thing about so many people being so upset that trans athletes are playing in women's sport is the fact that a lot of those people don't seem to support women's sport or follow it or care about it at all until there is a trans athlete involved. And that's sort of what this looks like from the outside, right? And I would love to know a lot more stuff about it. And I know that certainly what happened here was that the Canadian Danielle McGahey, I think that's how you pronounce it, her name. I think that's right. Has kind of forced the ICC's hand a little bit here with the way that, with the decision by Canadian cricket, but this could have been a decision, kind of anywhere. And, I think we saw, I think we certainly saw that this was a something that was forced on them, which is fine. I don't think they can really sit their heads in the sand. Like, this has been something that's been happening in professional sport for a very, very long time. And the fact that the ICC waited until a trans athlete was picked for a national team just shows you how reactionary they have been and how little research and how little thought they've put into it. So the ICC said in a statement, the changes to the gender eligibility regulations resulted from an extensive consultation process and is founded in science and aligned with the core principles developed during the review. I just don't believe any of that. Because if that was the case, I don't think it would have followed directly after Canada picking Danielle to actually play. I'm sorry. I think that's absolutely nonsense. Inclusivity is incredibly important to us as a sport, but our priority was to protect the integrity of the international women's game and the safety of the players. There is certainly, I'm not going to get into all that. From a scientific point of view, where I've been really interested about it is that we do know that a lot of the advantages that athletes have as men when they transition to women don't actually follow over. So we know that the whole thing about the integrity and the safety of the game and all that sort of stuff doesn't matter. But there are certain things that you cannot deny, right? And I say this as someone who believes trans athletes should be certainly not used as a political football, so to speak, in general, which is what they have been. Let's be honest, this has become a story because a lot of alt-right people have used it as a story. And when you actually start to go through the numbers of how many trans athletes there are, how little impact they have on professional sports, it becomes a little bit silly. And the whole idea of LeBron James suddenly deciding he wants to be a woman so he can be better, all that sort of stuff that you hear about is almost always nonsense. And a lot of trans athletes, are not very good at the sports when they transition into them. But there are things that you can't undo. And I'll just want to explain one for cricket, which is really, really interesting. So if a player does go, as a man, does go through puberty and then becomes, I don't know, let's say 6'4" or 6'5", or even taller than that, let's say 6'6" or 6'7", and then they transition. They're not transitioning to become a professional athlete because that would be ludicrous, especially for the fact that you would probably not make any money because of what all these sports are doing, although that always seems to be the fear. But if they do transition and then become a woman, what that means is that there aren't many females who actually grow to that height. And, having talked to female cricketers before, one reason they don't always like practicing against men is not because they like that the ball comes on a little bit faster, and that, the spinners can sometimes get more revolutions on the ball at a higher speed and all this sort of stuff. It actually helps them practice. The problem is that men, especially male professional cricketers, are far taller than female professional cricketers. So there is always an advantage there. I just don't think any of that was really taken in. And I as I say, I don't think the ICC looked at any of that sort of stuff. We are getting certainly going to a point when it comes to professional sport where the idea that there are only men and there are only women, I think we now know scientifically that's nonsense. This is going to sound like a huge reach, but this actually reminds me a lot of the chucking situation, where we thought there were bowlers who were chuckers and bowlers who weren't chuckers. And then science sort of showed us that actually the vast majority of bowlers straightened their arm. And, no one was bowling with a perfectly straightened arm. In fact, it was almost impossible to be able to bowl with that arm. And, whether it be Casta Samanya or the trans athletes, we are finding, we have got all these different spectrums now, players who are, or athletes who are intersex and everything else. Just banning these people doesn't really help. That's not going to stop trans people wanting to play cricket, right? And so it doesn't, and obviously, if you have gone through all the hormone treatments and everything else you need to go through, and I've got friends who are trans, it's horrendous, the whole thing. Like it's a big lifestyle thing, and it affects your body in so many different ways. It's a huge thing. But these people aren't going to be able to go back and go to be able to play as men at the kind of level that they should be anyway. It's probably also no longer, you talk about safety and inclusivity. Well, they're now excluded from that, and their safety is no longer looked at as well, which is another interesting thing that is not looked at as much when we talk about trans athletes. But what I'm trying to say is, I really believe, a little bit like the chucking conversation, is we are going to find out that these things are a lot more fluid than we ever thought they were. And I thought when Casta Samanya came through, that actually allowed sport to realize that, just having two versions of male and female with disabilities spread around those as well doesn't really work anymore. And it'd be really interesting to see if that, the first sorts of major sports who kind of do that and actually start to make a big deal of all that sort of thing and everything else. But I fundamentally believe that this is a reaction to what happened in Canada with Danielle. And I think that she's retired her career, which of course, again, it's not really that she's retired her international career, right? Like, her international career is just over because of a decision by a bunch of people who probably didn't spend as much time or effort. And, they can talk about the science and everything else. They haven't shown us all the details of that. So all we have is a press statement. If someone from the ICC wants to get in touch and show me all the information and how long they've been researching this. But my thought is that we finally had a trans player make it, and they've made a decision off the back of that. And I just don't think that's the right way for a sport of our size to be acting. But unfortunately, it is how our sport acts again and again and again. And one of the reasons that something like this annoys me is because it's no different. I mean, it matters a lot more to Danielle and to the players who are excluded, but it's no different than them not knowing that Kookaburra changed the ball. Right? Which is, so on one thing, you've got people's lives that you're fucking with, and the other one, you've just got a ball. But the ICC don't know anything, right? And part of it is the way they're funded and the way that the actual, this isn't having a go at the ICC, because I think they do a great job with the limited amount of funds that are actually given to by the major cricket boards. But the point is that we have the second biggest sport in the world, and too often these things are just thrown together and not done professionally, in a haphazard way. We don't really run the sport in the way that it should be run. And again, in this case, there Danielle, and I'm sure there are other cricketers who are working their way through the system as well, who've had their hopes dashed. But as I said, to me, the human element is incredibly important. But getting things right, having a process, working your way through playing conditions, working, something like the zombie ball decision that we talked about, a couple of years ago, seeing if that is something that can be changed. The fact that we're going to have a World Cup final probably one day, knowing our luck, where a player flicks a ball for 4 and wins the game off the last ball, but the umpire gives them out LBW, and they still lose the game despite the fact that they've just hit a 4, and no one's actually done anything to change any of that. There is an issue, and there are lots of issues within cricket that unfortunately are being presided over by older, out of touch people. And then there's the illusion of science and the illusion of planning. I can promise you that most decisions that are made by the ICC, from people who've been in those meetings, who've shared the conversations with me, are just not professional. There isn't enough research put in. Quite often, when there is research that goes against the general consensus of the room, they will just go against the research anyway. And this seems to me like another case where they got themselves into a sticky situation with what was happening in Canada. And so they came across, they suddenly had been doing all this research about trans women playing in their sport. As usual with the ICC, I don't really buy any of it.